Rain fell softly on the broken streets of a forgotten town, as if heaven itself was quietly weeping. The roofs were old tin sheets, rusted and bent. The walls were cracked. The streetlights flickered like tired souls struggling to stay awake, and in one small room at the edge of the town lived a boy named Daniel, a boy whose life had known more pain than peace. Daniel was only 11 years old, but his eyes carried the sadness of a man who had lived a lifetime of suffering. His clothes were always clean but worn thin. His shoes had holes in them, and in winter his feet froze as he walked to school. Yet he never complained, because at home, complaining had no meaning. Pain was normal there. His father had died when Daniel was just 5 years old. A factory accident had crushed his body and shattered their family forever. One moment his father was alive, laughing with him, lifting him high in the air, and the next moment he was gone, wrapped in white cloth, lying cold and silent. From that day onward life became hard. Daniel's mother Mary worked as a cleaner in rich homes. Sometimes she worked all day and all night just to earn enough to buy bread. Her hands became rough and cracked. Her eyes lost their youth. Her back bent under the weight of survival. But her love for Daniel never weakened. That night, when Daniel slept, Mary often cried quietly beside his bed, and every night before sleeping she whispered the same words, "Jesus, please protect my son. I have nothing else but you." But despite prayers, life kept getting harder at school. Daniel was different. Other children had books, lunchboxes filled with food, clean uniforms. Daniel came with empty pockets and an empty stomach. Some children laughed at him. "Hey, poor boy, your shoes look like they'll die before you. Does your mother even earn money?" Their cruel words cut deeper than knives. Daniel never fought, never answered back. He only lowered his eyes and pressed his lips together to stop his tears. Inside his heart, he asked a question he was too afraid to speak out loud. One day at school, Daniel fainted during class. He had not eaten in 2 days. The teacher rushed him to the office. When Mary arrived, trembling with fear, the truth broke her heart. She cried all the way home that day. That night, she held Daniel in her arms and whispered through tears, "I'm sorry, my son. I tried my best." Daniel gently wiped her tears and said something that broke her even more. "It's okay, Mama. Jesus will help us." Winter came. The cold became deadly. Work became scarce. One night, Mary returned home with empty hands. No bread, no rice, no money. Daniel sat quietly in the corner, hugging his knees. Mary looked at her son and fell to her knees on the floor. For the first time in her life, she broke completely. "Jesus, I can't do this anymore." Her voice shook violently. That night, Daniel went to bed hungry, his stomach burning with pain. He tried to sleep, but hunger refused to let him rest. Tears slipped into his pillow. In the darkness, he whispered softly, "Jesus, if you are real, please help my mother." At the edge of town stood an old abandoned church. Its roof was broken, its windows shattered, its wooden door half rotted. People said nobody went there anymore. They said God had forgotten that place. But one cold evening, Daniel walked there alone. His hands were shaking from cold and fear. Each step felt heavy. He pushed open the broken door, and the wind howled inside the empty building. Dust covered the wooden benches. The cross still stood at the front, cracked but standing. Daniel walked slowly toward it. He had never prayed like this before. He knelt on the cold floor. "Jesus, I don't know how to pray, but my mother is tired. I am hungry. Life is too hard. If you can hear me, please don't forget us." For the first time in his life, he felt something strange. Not a voice, not a vision, but a deep, quiet peace that wrapped around his heart like warm light. When he stood up, his hunger remained, but his fear was gone. The next morning, Mary prepared to go out searching for work, knowing she might return again with nothing. But as she opened the door, she froze. A small bag of groceries lay on the ground, bread, rice, milk, and a small envelope containing enough money for a week. There was no name, no note. Mary's hands trembled. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "Jesus, was this you?" Inside, Daniel stared at the food in disbelief. Tears rolled down his face. "Mama, Jesus heard me." From that day onward, their life did not suddenly become rich, but something had changed. Hope had entered their home. Months later, tragedy struck again. Mary fell seriously ill. Her lungs were weak from years of cleaning chemicals and cold nights. The doctors said she needed rest and medicine, both of which cost money. Daniel began working after school, cleaned cars, carried bags at the market, collected scrap metal. Sometimes he worked until midnight. One night, after a long day, he collapsed on the street from exhaustion. People walked past him, no one stopped, until an old man wearing a worn Bible in his coat pocket knelt beside him. "Son, where is your family?" That moment would change Daniel's life forever. The old man gently lifted Daniel from the cold pavement and helped him sit on a bench near the quiet street corner. The night was silent, except for Daniel's weak breathing and the distant barking of stray dogs. His small body shivered from exhaustion and hunger. The old man wrapped his worn coat around Daniel's shoulders. "You shouldn't be alone at this hour, son," he said softly. Daniel tried to speak, but his lips were dry. The old man opened a small bottle of water and held it to his mouth. After a few slow sips, Daniel's strength returned just enough for him to whisper, My mother is sick." The old man's eyes softened. He closed them briefly, as if in prayer, then helped Daniel to his feet. "Take me to her." Mary lay on the thin mattress, her breathing shallow, her face pale like paper. The walls of the room felt closer than ever. Fear hung in the air like thick smoke when Daniel entered with the old man. Mary tried to sit up but couldn't. Her body trembled violently. "Daniel, you shouldn't be out so late." The old man knelt beside her bed and gently placed his hand near her head, respectful and careful. "Sister, what is your name?" he asked. "Mary," she whispered. The old man nodded slowly. "My name is Joseph. I traveled town to town helping where I can, and more than anything, I pray." Mary's eyes slowly filled with tears. She wanted to believe. She wanted to hope. But pain had crushed her heart too many times. "I've prayed my whole life," she whispered, "but suffering never leaves." Joseph didn't argue. He simply bowed his head. "May I pray with you now?" Mary hesitated. Then, slowly, she nodded. Daniel held his mother's trembling hand as Joseph prayed in a quiet, gentle voice, not loudly, not with drama but with deep, steady faith. "Jesus, you see this mother. You see this child. You see their nights of hunger and fear. If it is your will, bring healing where doctors cannot. Bring strength where the world has given weakness." When Joseph finished praying, nothing sudden happened. No light from the sky. No instant miracle. But Mary felt something she had not felt in months. Peace. Joseph stayed the night on the floor of their small room. In the morning, Mary's fever was still high. Joseph knew she would not survive long without medicine and rest. Later that day, Joseph spoke quietly to Daniel outside. "Son, your mother needs treatment. I know a church shelter in the next city. They help the poor and the sick. But the journey is long." Daniel's heart began to race. Will she live? Joseph was honest. "Only God knows. But this is her best chance." That night, Daniel sat beside his mother and told her the truth. Mary listened silently. Then she reached for his face with weak hands. "I don't want to leave you alone in this world," she whispered. Daniel tried to be strong, but tears fell freely. "Jesus will be with me, Mama, like he always is." The next morning, Joseph arranged a simple transport wagon. Mary was wrapped in blankets. Daniel kissed her forehead again and again as the wagon began to move. Mary turned her head with great effort and called out, "Daniel." He ran beside the wagon. "No matter what happens," she whispered, "never leave Jesus." Daniel broke down in tears as the wagon disappeared into the distance. That was the day. Daniel became truly alone. Weeks passed. No letter, no message, no news. No news. Daniel kept working day and night, cleaning, carrying, collecting. He slept in corners, in abandoned rooms, sometimes under open sky. Hunger became a daily companion every night. He walked to the old broken church on the hill, and every night he knelt alone. "Jesus, please bring my mother back." But the silence grew heavier. One rainy night, Daniel collapsed in that same church, his hands shaking violently. His faith felt small against the weight of pain. "Did I do something wrong?" he cried softly. "Why won't you answer me?" For the first time, doubt entered his heart. One evening, Joseph returned to the town. Daniel saw him from a distance and ran toward him with desperate hope. "Joseph, where is my mother?" Joseph stopped. His eyes were heavy. His shoulders looked weaker than before he spoke. Daniel already knew. Joseph slowly shook his head. "Mary fought bravely, but her body was too tired. She went to be with the Lord 3 days ago." The world stopped. Daniel's ears rang loudly. His knees buckled. He fell to the ground like a broken doll. No. You promised Jesus would take care of her." The pain came like a storm tearing through his chest. He screamed into the empty street. People watched in silence. That night, Daniel did not go to the church. For the first time, he ran away from God. Days passed. Then weeks. Daniel stopped praying, stopped speaking much, stopped hoping. He worked only to survive. His eyes became empty. His smile disappeared. The boy who once believed with a pure heart now carried anger like a wound that would not heal. One night, he sat alone beside a fire in the market alley. Rain fell heavily around him. "If Jesus is real," he whispered bitterly, "then why did he take my mother?" Tears mixed with rain on his face. At that moment, a young man sat beside him. His clothes were clean, his posture gentle. He had kind eyes. "Because sometimes," the man said softly, "Jesus saves us in ways we don't understand yet." Daniel looked up sharply. "Then why does it hurt so much?" The young man paused. "Because love always hurts when it leaves." The young man introduced himself as Ethan. He had once lived on the streets too. He was once angry at God too. He had lost his entire family in a fire. "For years," Ethan said, "I hated Jesus, but one day I realized he was the only one who stayed with me even when everyone else was gone." Daniel listened silently. At Ethan placed something into Daniel's hand, a small wooden cross. "When your heart feels empty, hold this not as an answer, but as a reminder, you are not alone." Daniel didn't respond, but he kept the cross. Life on the streets grew darker. Daniel met boys who stole, Who fought? Who survived by hurting others? They offered him money, food, protection. Faith won't feed you, one of them mocked. Strength will. For the first time in his life, Daniel felt tempted. He was tired of being weak, tired of praying to silence, tired of losing everything that night. He stood between two paths. One led to darkness, the other led to faith, and he didn't know which to choose. The alley was cold that night, rainwater mixed with mud beneath Daniel's bare feet. The fire in the rusted metal drum flickered weakly as the street boys laughed around it. Their laughter was loud but empty. It carried the sound of survival, not joy. A tall boy named Rico, the leader of the group, tossed Daniel a piece of bread. "Welcome to the real world, church boy," Rico smirked. "Here, we survive with our hands, not prayers." Daniel caught the bread. His stomach burned with hunger. For a moment, he forgot everything: his mother, the church, even Jesus. He ate like someone who hadn't tasted food in days. Rico watched closely. "Tomorrow night," he said, "you work with us. Easy job. Just grab a bag and run." Daniel froze. "Steal," he whispered. Rico laughed. "We call it surviving." Daniel looked down at his hands. They were thin, weak, empty. Hunger twisted inside him again, and in his pocket, the small wooden cross pressed against his skin. The next night, Daniel followed the boys into the market district. Bright lights, loud music, and crowds filled the streets. Rich people walked with bags full of food while beggars sat hungry on the pavement. Rico leaned close. "That man," he whispered, pointing to a shopper. "When I bump him, you grab the bag." Daniel's heart pounded so loudly he felt in his ears. The man passed. Rico shoved him. The bag swung free, and in that split second, Daniel grabbed it. They ran. Fast, hard, breathless. They hid behind a row of trash bins, laughing wildly. "You did it," Rico shouted. "You're one of us now." Daniel stared at the stolen bag. Food spilled out. For the first time in weeks he was full. But that night, he couldn't sleep. His hands felt dirty, and in his dreams, he saw his mother's face, sad and silent. Days turned into weeks. Daniel stopped going to the church, stopped carrying scrap, stopped praying. He stole again and again. Each time became easier, but every night, when the world went quiet, the cross in his pocket felt heavier. One night, Ethan, the young man who gave him the cross, found him behind the market stalls. "Daniel," he said softly, "you're losing yourself." Daniel laughed bitterly. "I already lost everything." Ethan stepped closer. "You've lost your way, not your soul," Daniel shouted in anger. "Where was Jesus when my mother died?" Ethan stood silently for a long moment. Then he answered, "The same place he was when his own mother watched him die." Those words struck Daniel's heart like thunder. One night, Rico came with excitement in his eyes. "Big job tonight," he said. "One store, one run. We'll be rich." Daniel hesitated. "What kind of store?" Rico smiled darkly. "Jewelry." Daniel's heart began to race in fear. "That's different. That's dangerous." Rico grabbed his collar. "You're in or you're nothing." That night, the group moved through the shadows. The glass shattered. Alarms screamed. Police sirens exploded. Through the air, panic broke out. Boys ran in every direction. Daniel ran faster than he ever had before, but a strong hand grabbed his arm. He was thrown to the ground, a foot pressed against his back. Handcuffs clicked shut. For the first time in his life, Daniel was arrested. Inside the police van, Daniel sat shaking. Tears fell freely now. The tough street mask was gone. He was just a scared boy again. An officer reached into his pocket and pulled something out, the small wooden cross. The officer looked at it, confused. "This yours?" Daniel nodded through tears. The officer hesitated, then placed it back into Daniel's hand. "Hold on to it," he said quietly. "You're going to need hope." That night in the holding cell, Daniel knelt on the cold floor. For the first time since his mother's death, "Jesus, I'm lost." His voice broke apart. "If you still want me, I'm here." He expected silence, but inside his heart, he felt warmth again. Morning came. Rico and the others stood on the other side of the bars. All free, they had blamed everything on Daniel. "You were caught with the bag," Rico said coldly. "You're the thief, not us." Daniel stared in shock. "You promised." Rico turned away. And just like that, Daniel stood alone again. Days passed in detention. No one visited, no family, no friends, just silence. One night, Daniel screamed in pain and anger inside the cell. "Why me, Jesus? I tried to believe. I tried to be good." His voice echoed against the walls. He slid down the wall and cried until he had no tears left. That was his lowest point. A door opens one afternoon. A woman entered the detention center. She wore simple clothes and carried a Bible. She asked to see Daniel. Her name was Sarah. "We run a shelter for boys with nowhere to go," she said. "Someone told us about you." Daniel looked at her with tired eyes. "I don't belong anywhere," Sarah smiled gently. "Then you belong with us." The iron gate of the shelter closed slowly behind Daniel with a soft metallic sound. For a moment, he stood frozen, his heart racing. The building before him was simple, plain walls. Clean, The cold wind whispered through the empty streets as Daniel walked alone toward the hill. The sky was heavy with clouds, and the old town seemed quieter than ever before. Every step felt familiar and painful. The broken church stood exactly where it always had. Its walls were more cracked now. The door hung loose on one hinge. Grass had grown through the stones at the entrance. And yet, to Daniel, it was still the most sacred place on earth. This was where a hungry boy once whispered his first desperate prayer. This was where hope was born. Daniel pushed. The door opened slowly. The inside smelled of dust and rain. The wooden benches were few and now some had been stolen, others destroyed. The roof still leaked, and puddles reflected the faint light coming through broken windows. The cross still stood at the front. Crooked, cracked, but standing, Daniel walked forward and knelt on the same cold floor where he once cried as a starving child. "Jesus, I came back," he whispered. His voice trembled as memories flooded his heart. His mother's smile, Joseph's prayer, his fall into darkness, the prison cell, the shelter, the hospital bed. "For a long time, I was angry at you. I thought you abandoned me. But now I see, you never left." Tears dropped onto the dusty floor. "You were there when I stole. You were there when I was arrested. You were there when I almost died. And you were there when I forgave." The church was silent. But Daniel wasn't afraid of the silence anymore. Suddenly, footsteps echoed outside. Heavy, rough, many. Daniel looked back as a group of men entered the church. They wore construction jackets and hard boots. One of them carried papers in his hand. "Kid, this place is coming down," the man said bluntly. "You shouldn't be here." Daniel slowly stood. "This church saved my life." The men laughed. "It's just an old building." Another said, "Faith won't stop the bulldozers." Daniel took a deep breath. "It may be just a building to you," he said quietly, "but to me, it was the only place where I wasn't invisible." The men hesitated. Something in his voice made them pause. Word spread quickly through the streets that the old church was about to be destroyed. People began to gather, poor families, old women, struggling workers, sheltered children, even shopkeepers. Joseph arrived. So did Ethan. And then Sarah. She stood beside Daniel and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't stand alone anymore," she whispered. More people stepped forward. One man spoke out loudly. "I prayed here when my child was sick." Another woman cried, "This place gave me strength when my husband died." A young boy shouted, "This is where I learned to pray." The crowd grew. The men with the papers looked uncertain. The engine of the bulldozer roared. Dust filled the air. The driver was ready. Daniel stepped forward and stood directly in front of the machine. His knees shook, but his voice did not. "If you destroy this church," he said firmly, "you destroy the only hope some of us have left." Silence fell. The driver turned off the engine. The crowd erupted in tears and applause that day. The church was not destroyed. Something changed in Daniel that day. For the first time, he realized that his pain had power. His story had meaning. He began helping at the shelter not just as a boy who lived there, but as a leader. He prayed with broken children, sat beside angry teenagers, held the hands of boys who reminded him of himself. Something changed in Daniel that day. For the first time, he realized that his pain had power. His story had meaning. He began helping at the shelter not just as a boy who lived there, but as a leader. He prayed with broken children, sat beside angry teenagers, held the hands of boys who reminded him of himself. And every time one of them asked, "Will my life ever get better?" Daniel would gently answer, "I don't know when, but I know who. Jesus never leaves." One quiet evening, Sarah handed Daniel a letter. It came from another city. She said softly. Daniel opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a medical report from the shelter where his mother had been taken long ago. At the bottom of the letter were these words: "Mary's final days were filled with peace. She spoke of her son daily. Her last recorded words were, 'Jesus will never leave my Daniel.'" Daniel fell to his knees, and this time he didn't cry in pain. He cried in gratitude. The story did not end with a child. It continued with a man. Years passed. Daniel grew into a young leader, then a mentor, and finally the director of the very shelter that once saved his life. The broken church on the hill was rebuilt not with stone alone, but with stories. Stories of the hungry, stories of the lost, stories of the forgiven. And at the front of the church now hung a new wooden cross carved from the same tree that once held the broken one. One evening, Daniel stood alone in the church again, now rebuilt, now alive, now full. He looked up at the cross and whispered, "When life was hard, you became my hope." Outside, children laughed. Inside, candles glowed. And in Daniel's heart, there was finally peace.